Once upon a time, in the highest mountains of Colorado, there was a base where men learned to fight in the worst conditions on Earth. This is the story of Camp Hall and the Christmas Eve that nobody forgot. The year was 1943. The war in Europe was raging. The Allies knew they would eventually have to fight in the mountains of Italy, in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, in places where normal soldiers could not survive. So they created a special kind of soldier. They created the 10th Mountain Division. These men were different. They were ski champions from Colorado, lumberjacks from Oregon, forest rangers from Montana. They were men who knew snow, who understood cold, who could move through mountains like ghosts. They were brought together at Camp Hall, 10,000 feet above sea level, in some of the most brutal country in America. Camp Hall was not a nice place. The winter temperatures dropped to 30 below zero. The wind howled through the valley without mercy. The snow fell and fell and fell, sometimes 10 feet in a single storm. The men trained in whiteout conditions, climbing frozen cliffs, skiing through blizzards, learning to survive when survival seemed impossible. They lived in wooden barracks that never got warm. They woke every morning to ice on the inside of their windows. They ate frozen rations and dreamed of hot food. They wrote letters home with fingers so cold they could barely hold a pencil. Christmas Eve arrived. For most of the men, it was just another day. There would be no decorations, no trees, no families gathered around the fire. There would be no presents, no turkey dinners, no carols sung by candlelight. There would be just the cold and the snow and the endless training. But someone, somewhere, decided that these men deserved something more. A young lieutenant named James Renninger was put in charge of a secret mission. His orders were simple. Go into the forest. Find a tree, bring it back. Make it beautiful. Renninger took a small group of men and hiked into the woods. The snow was deep, up to their waists in places. The cold bit through their uniforms. But they kept going, because this was not training. This was something important. They found a perfect pine tree, tall and full, covered with snow. They cut it down and carried it back to camp, taking turns dragging it through the drifts. By the time they returned, they were exhausted and half frozen. But they were smiling. The tree went up in the mess hall. It stood there, bare and beautiful, filling the room with the smell of pine. The men gathered around it, silent at first, remembering other Christmases, other trees, other lives. Then someone started singing. It was quiet at first, just a single voice, rough and uncertain. Silent night, holy night. Other voices joined, one by one, until the whole mess hall was filled with song. All is calm, all is bright. They sang every carol they knew. They sang until their voices were hoarse. They sang because it was Christmas Eve, and they were 10,000 feet up a mountain, and the war was waiting for them, and they needed to remember why they were fighting. After the singing, the men exchanged gifts. Not real gifts, because there was nothing to buy and nowhere to buy it. They gave each other things they had made. A carving from a piece of wood, a drawing on a scrap of paper, a poem written in pencil on the back of a map. Small things, precious things. Private First Class Michael Naranjo, a young man from New Mexico, gave his best friend a pair of handmade mittens. He had knitted them himself, learning from a book, working on them in secret for weeks. His friend put them on and cried, because his hands had been frostbitten in training, and the cold hurt him all the time. Sergeant Thomas McGrath, a former lumberjack from Oregon, gave each man in his squad a small wooden cross. He had carved them from pine, one for every man, 40 crosses in all. He did not say why. He did not need to. Then came the moment that nobody forgot. A truck arrived at the edge of camp, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The men gathered to see what it was. The back opened, and crates were unloaded. Crates marked with a symbol everyone recognized, the Red Cross. Inside were packages from home, thousands of them, sent by families who had mailed them weeks ago, not knowing if they would arrive in time. They had arrived on Christmas Eve. The men crowded around as the packages were handed out. Each man took his box and opened it slowly, savoring the moment. Inside were cookies baked by mothers, socks knitted by sisters, letters written by wives and sweethearts. There were photographs and candy and small gifts that meant everything. Private Naranjo opened his package and found a photograph of his family standing in front of their house in Santa Fe. His mother was smiling. His father was holding a sign that said, "We are proud of you, son." He looked at it for a long time, then tucked it inside his shirt, next to his heart. Sergeant McGrath opened his package and found a letter from his wife. She wrote about the children, about the farm, about how much she missed him. She wrote that she had put a star in the window for him, like all the families did, and that she looked at it every night before she went to sleep. He read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. The night wore on. The men sat in the mess hall, eating cookies and reading letters and talking quietly. The tree stood in the corner, still bare, but somehow beautiful. Outside, the snow continued to fall. But inside, for a few hours, there was warmth. Lieutenant Renninger stood at the door, watching his men. He knew what was coming. He knew that many of these boys would not survive the war. He knew that some of them were celebrating their last Christmas. But tonight, they were happy. Tonight, they were at peace. He stepped outside for a moment, into the cold and the dark. The snow fell softly, silently, covering everything in white. He looked up at the sky, at the millions of stars shining through the clouds, and he said a prayer for his men, for their families, for the world. When he went back inside, the men were singing again. This time it was not a carol. It was a song from home, a song they all knew. "Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me." They sang it loud and off-key and laughing, because that was what soldiers did on Christmas Eve. The 10th Mountain Division shipped out a few months later. They fought in Italy, in the mountains that everyone said were impossible. They climbed cliffs at night and attacked at dawn. They took positions that the Germans thought were unassailable. They lost many men, but they never lost the spirit that had been born on that Christmas Eve at Camp Hall. Michael Naranjo survived the war. He went home to New Mexico, became a teacher, raised a family. He kept that photograph of his parents for the rest of his life. When he was an old man, he gave it to his grandson and told him the story of the Christmas Eve when the snow stopped falling and the world felt like home. Thomas McGrath did not survive. He was killed in the spring of 1945 in the final days of the Italian campaign. His men found his body and buried him there, in the mountains he had loved. In his pocket was the letter from his wife, still folded carefully, still close to his heart. His men sent it home to her, along with the wooden cross he had kept for himself. Today, Camp Halle is mostly gone. The barracks have been torn down. The mess hall is empty. The wind still howls through the valley, and the snow still falls in winter. But if you go there on Christmas Eve, if you stand in the place where the tree once stood, you can still hear them. The voices of young men singing carols in the cold. The sound of laughter drifting through the darkness. The memory of a night when the war stopped just for a little while, and the men of the 10th Mountain Division were home.